Unfortunately, one of our speakers couldn't join us this evening, so tonight's webinar will just focus on pub production. So apologies to anyone who's joined, and they were hoping to hear from a sales perspective. My name is Talitha, and I'm the Digital Content Officer for the committee this year. My preferred pronouns are she and her. In terms of a physical description, I'm a pale white woman with long brown hair. I'm wearing my glasses this evening. I've got wearing a black shirt, and my background's pretty boring. It's just a white wall with some grey cupboards. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. I think it just came up there. This webinar is being recorded and we'll upload that to YouTube. Live captions should be available, so you should be able to turn those on and off at the bottom of your screen. In terms of the structure of the webinar, Ruth and I will talk amongst ourselves for the first 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So please do submit your questions in the chat function, and we'll get to those later. Can I ask you, Ruth, just to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit more about your journey into publishing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Talitha says, my name's Ruth. Preferred pronouns are she, her. I'm a very similar description now.
I know, I didn't realize.
It's like we planned this. I'm also a white woman with long, fair brownish hair worn down. I'm wearing a black top cut straight across the neckline and just with a plain white wall background. So we have a very similar theme going on. I'm the publishing and production manager at the Lilliput Press. Before this, I've worked in a number of different areas of publishing, including educational publishing, academic publishing, producing digital materials, printing, and even back at the very beginning, book selling. So I'm very happy to be here and talk to Talitha and to you all about particularly tonight, sales and production.
Thanks, Ruth. Could you actually go into a bit more detail about your current role as a production and publishing manager, and just kind of tell us about what your main duties and responsibilities are, and maybe kind of things you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Lilliput Press, it's been around for over 35 years, established in 1984 by Anthony Farrell. And since then, it has published just about over 600 books are in the backlist. So it's a fierce turnout for a very small press. We have a small staff. It's myself and Anthony, and at the moment we have 2 assistants. We also have a part-time production editor as well. So with regards to responsibilities, my title says publishing and production manager, but I dip into everything. So at the moment I would work on, like it says, production. So making sure all the books are made, liaising with freelancers, making sure the books go through the production process, keeping on schedule, and then sending them to print. It would also encompass the publicity. So I work with our assistant on making sure the books are out in the world, that people hear about them. We also have work on sales. So again, ensuring that the books are available for sale in many different distribution areas. There's dealing with day-to-day queries and staff. There are many areas actually to publishing, from looking into new formats like ebooks and audiobook, or working with other publishers. Like we're part of Publishing Ireland as well, so we do talk to other Irish publishers and publishers in the UK. And Lilliput sells a lot of rights as well, so there's a lot of connections with other people, other presses, and of course authors, the core of it all. Liaising with authors, talking to them on a daily basis, and helping them bring their work into the world.
Okay, thanks for that. Could you also maybe talk about maybe the main challenges you kind of face in like the production department? And I know last year has been one year of many struggles, and maybe did the COVID pandemic maybe make you face any new challenges to publishing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, well, I mean, as an overview of what production is, I guess I can start with that.
Yeah, of course.
So, and I'll get in, it kind of helps know the context
Yeah.
Before we know the problems.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And the solutions. So with production, it covers a number of areas. So not just what you would imagine, which is the physical making of the book, but also seeing a book through the process, scheduling a book, making budgets, enlisting people to help at every stage. So at the beginning, when the publisher, Anthony Farrell, contracts a book, so brings an author into the press, that's the point at which we make the plan. We decide when the book will come out, what the format will be. Will it be hardback, paperback? How long do we think it will be based on the manuscript? And how much editing is needed at that stage. So all of those things are set up early on, as well as the publicity schedule. And from there, we deal with different people, whether it's an editor to work on the book, or a designer to talk about the cover design, or a typesetter to set the book up. And that takes place over about, for us, it would be 6 to 8 months. Mm-hmm. Other bigger publishers that may have many more books on their schedule, or the ability to have longer lead time, might work on a book for a year or maybe even 2 years. In our case, we usually rattle them through, but we like to keep on top of the schedule and the books coming out and the freshness of the author's work. So the books go through their editorial process, then they're sent to typesetting. From there, the proofs are checked for any final errors, and the cover design is confirmed as well and completed at the same time. Then we send it to print. Sending a book to print, we send it to print maybe about 6 weeks or a month before publication, depending on where we're printing it and the urgency of getting it out. Of course, if you really need a book immediately, you can look around for who's available straight away to a short job. So that would be, as I said, about 6 weeks or a month before release. Then the book, when it comes out, we have all of our publicity arrive at the time of publication at our launch. So that's the idea of a production schedule. The production part of that, when you're dealing with the physical book itself, you can have, as you know, paperback, hardback, large format, smaller format, flaps. You can have different types of additional things. If you want headbands, tailbands, or ribbons, or anything included with the book, maybe you want an insert put in, something like that. So all of those decisions, like I was saying, you can make them at the very beginning so that you can get a good sense of the cost and the framework of the book. And of course, it's always very exciting when you get the physical copy in your hand and you see it all come to completion, see the vision be realized, and that the author gets it in their hands for the first time. The challenges that we've had, certainly in 2020, as you can imagine, that scheduling became slightly hairy at the start of 2020. So we all had January and February happily living our lives, planning for the future. And then March hit. A lot of publishers stalled what they were doing because there was so much uncertainty. They might have decided to wait to send a book to print, or they might have decided to wait to launch a book after it came into their warehouse. It was definitely a time of change every day. For us, we were, pros and cons. We were lucky in one way in that 3 of our main spring books had just come out. The bad side of that, as you can imagine, was those poor authors, all their physical events were cancelled. It was quite a blow to their ability to enjoy the books as well. One of our authors wasn't able, he doesn't live in Ireland, so he didn't actually see the book in a shop when it came out, and that's a very strange experience for authors. But at the same time, we did have the benefit of having received all of the books physically already, whereas I know other publishers were dealing then suddenly with maybe border restrictions, questions about whether flights were still going to carry things over. There were a lot of big questions, and a lot of people did then wait. They might have taken a spring book and put it into the autumn. So that was definitely an issue, paired with Brexit.
I was gonna say, yeah.
As if it was a bit like a TV series last year when you know, the setup of the first couple of months where you establish what everyone's doing, what their normal life is like, and then give them some drama and then some more drama. What are they going to do with Brexit? Definitely, I think that has had an impact and has a continuing impact on something like production. For example, now we've actually had, I guess we had a bit of time to deal with it. Like I was saying, a number of our books had already come in early last year, but I know other publishers who faced, maybe even towards the end of the year, early this year, a lot of problems with getting books into the country from Brexit, from the delays in France. You might remember those huge backlogs. The books physically, if they're printed, say in Europe, they're on a truck in France, and they would be by this stage in Dublin or at another point maybe in London, but they were literally stuck somewhere on that whole parade of trucks. So that's quite it's quite a stressful, it's quite a challenging experience. But like that, kind of like COVID, I think everyone experiences that same difficulty, you know, across so many industries. So it's not like a single publisher would be pointed out to say you were late on that book. I think that it was an industry-wide experience. But the Brexit issue, more of that. Interestingly, now with costs shipping between the island of Ireland and mainland Britain, that has had an impact on production too, because now it's something you have to budget for. The delays have eased up, so it's not as bad as it was earlier in the year, thankfully. I think there was no telling how long that would last, but certainly there are costs now. There are things to consider. So that's like an ongoing issue, and I know it's one which publishers are talking about all over, in Britain as well. I know a lot of people who would have exported books to Europe have had real trouble just getting their books out of the country. That additional cost, will they have to change their price point, which might make their books less attractive? Like, you know, as we all know, books are ridiculously underpriced at times. So it does make it a challenge to try and keep within what the market expects, but also have these additional costs, which are, you know, most likely long-term costs. So Brexit has been challenging for everyone. The solutions to these things, well, certainly when COVID happened, we were all just searching for solutions. I think people reacted very well, though, and everyone really put a lot of effort into coming back as fast as they could. Distributors have been fantastic. I'll mention distributors in a second because that leads into sales. But we have distributors, Guild Distribution, Central Books, and their teams were working all through, like with restrictions in place, but they're working all through the heaviest stages of lockdown. When I was, you know, only able to go 2 kilometers from my house and setting up my working from home, there were still people in the distribution center physically putting the books on pallets, sending them out, whatever they were able to do, which was really a lifesaver for the book industry at the time, I think. So with that, people really put a lot of effort in to do what they could. There might have been the need to solve things by getting a different printer, maybe one that might be within the island of Ireland. Different things happen then, though, because Irish printers, while they're very, very good quality, have a different price range to ones further away. As you can imagine, the further away you go, in some ways, the cheaper the print gets. But you have to weigh things up, whether you need a book immediately, whether it's worth the any additional cost. And then when it comes to Brexit, like that, I think people really just had to weigh up what was going on, maybe take a hit the first couple of times you get caught by customs, and then just try to be a bit smarter about scheduling and figure out if you know it's going to cost this much for this weight of books, maybe you should wait or try to consolidate your books or do something to off balance that cost, make it worth your while. So I think that's something people are still feeling out a bit, trying to see how these charges or any shipping costs fall out. But I think one of the ways to solve these things is by talking to people and by working together, working with other publishers, distributors, and just seeing, has anyone done something well that can be done across the way, or even partnering with people and saying, can I help you if you help me? Like, what can we do together? I think that's the way through. But what I will say, though, I'll just do a quick description of what a distributor is, because I would imagine any people watching might not know what I'm talking about. So in terms of what we as a publisher, we send our books to print in a printing factory, from a printing company, and they then send the bulk of that stock to a warehouse, which might be Guild Distribution in Ireland. Argosy is another distributor. In Britain, there's Central Books, Turnaround. There are a number of distributors, Gardeners as well. The distributor holds on to the bulk of the stock, and they fulfill bookshop orders. Most bookshops really prefer ordering from distributors rather than from publishers directly. They get to order from multiple publishers at a time. They get a good discount. They also usually get very good delivery time, like they usually get next day delivery. Whereas with individual publishers, there's more nitty gritty, I guess, you know, depending on the size of the publisher. The distributor is a very smooth operation. And so they are, I guess they're a core part of the production and sales frame. But I think it's an area of publishing which people don't really talk about in these public facing talks. Distribution, it's key.
This goes all behind the scenes and people don't realize. Like...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so there are quite a lot of, I suppose, variables when it comes to production, deciding when a book comes out, how you're going to get it to readers. But like I was saying, even with the changes of the last year, I think people have really pulled together and tried to keep things on track as much as possible. I think that's been proven by the great online sales that have happened for a lot of books. Maybe not everyone has had as good sales as they would have had in person, but I think the experience of a lot of, say, bookshops who've set up their own websites, selling through there, the fact that they've been able to get books in from distributors, that publishers have been able to still send things to print, I think that is really that kind of evidence of people just keeping the flame going.
Yeah. That was great. It was a great overview. I think that was just, yeah, everything you just said, even about COVID and Brexit. People didn't realize the impact of Brexit and how it's impacted the distribution channels. One thing I wanted to ask was maybe people who not necessarily know that production is a department, is there any misconceptions about working within production?
Sure. Well, I guess in some ways, people who might not know as much about the behind the scenes, like you say, of publishing, might not think about production much at all. In a way, I know editorial work is often thought of and spoken of because many people who want to work in publishing are avid readers. They love books, they love reading stories, and their hearts are in the idea of helping someone bring that story out. So then it kind of links in with this idea of, well, editorial work brings that story out. Production work is also, clearly an essential part of the book industry as well. It's very interesting as an area, especially if you like making things, if you're good with your hands, if you have interest in design, visual things, or spatial reasoning. With book production, the book itself, you have to think about it when it doesn't exist. So you're taking the manuscript. I'm not necessarily looking at it from an editorial point of view, like, is the story of a good enough quality? But you're thinking, how long is it? How many pages is that going to be? Should the pages be big or small? What kind of typesetting should be used? Should it be classical or contemporary? How will that link in with the cover design? What type of cover do we want? Who do we want to pick up this book? How thick is it going to be? All of these things have a big impact actually on how a reader approaches the book. If you have quite a long manuscript, but you decide to go with a very small format, it's going to be extremely thick, and no one will carry that around. Like, that's impossible. So you have to balance the type of book it is and any physical attributes to the book or the story, or if it has illustrations, photographs, with the idea of the product. What you want, what you visualize it to be. Maybe you have books you can compare it to, you want it to look like something else. So I think that just the existence of production is something that maybe people don't necessarily think of straight away. And it's something I think people who are really interested in areas of graphic design, or, like I was saying, making things, might find it interesting to delve into this. Even just making your own books at home. There are loads of online tutorials. There are loads of books about bookmaking. And it's such a lovely thing to do, even if you don't end up working in publishing or in production. Just taking sheets, folding them up, binding them together, seeing how it works. It brings a whole other level of appreciation for the book as an object. Then otherwise, misconceptions about production. I suppose maybe the connection between your book and price. That could be
quite, yes. The universe, yeah.
Quite hard, isn't it? That's quite a hard one, because you have maybe dreams of an amazing hardback with beautiful headbands and tailbands and gold on the side and all the trimmings. But then if your book is something that people expect to be quite cheap, I don't know what it would be, like newspaper articles or something, then how do you justify, will people really pick it up? How do you present what you're making as being worth the cost of making it? Like, what's the balance? It's quite a tricky one. I think, first of all, you get to know what's out in the market. You look at, people who work in publishing tend to go into bookshops all the time, not just as a hobby, but also as an interesting, a way of seeing what people are doing. And seeing what is out there, maybe new fiction is just really only coming out in paperback. Maybe people aren't making hardbacks for that anymore so much. So then, as a customer, are you going to pick up a hardback, quite slim, of a debut short story writer, or are you going to pick up the same size book in paperback of a different short story writer, which is maybe €5 or €6 or pounds less expensive. And if you don't know who either of them are, but they both get good reviews, like what's your choice going to be? So there are some considerations around the market itself. Personally, I'm a book person. We're all book people. That's why we're here.
I was going to say, like, I'm not a hardback person. I always try. My favorite is to go for the paperback because it's more easily carried. It's just like you can flick through the pages more easily as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point as well. You're right. Like, will the audience be reading it? Like, where will they be reading it? Are they going to read it at home? Or in a library? You know, quite a lot of academic books are hardback because it's taken for granted they'll be used for years. They're going to be in a library. They need to be durable. Whereas you might say, oh, like my perfect audience, we know will be people commuting. They'll love this. So there's no point in giving something that's massive and heavy. They'll find it too hard. But then again, as I was saying, as book people, as people who love books, I also feel like publishers, particularly small publishers who maybe make work which is worthy or worthwhile without necessarily being totally commercial. But if you're able to do that, you follow your heart. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to follow your heart. And if your heart is like, this short story collection is just beautiful and we really want it to like shine, and we know the readers who read this will love it forever and will want it in hardback, and we're only going to do, you know, one printing of it. We want it to be the very best printing possible. Maybe you do go with the hardback. Maybe you do make that decision to put it all in and say, like, okay, maybe it's going against the market a bit, but you're following your reaction to the work as well. You're following what the work is implying in its story or tone or quality. If you believe in it, like I know, even like as an interesting example, there are a couple of interesting examples. The Art of the Glimpse, which Sinead Gleeson put together, is quite big. Mm-hmm. It's quite big and it's quite thick and it's hardback. And that's an anthology of short stories. Because it's an anthology of short stories, you can see how it's, you know, Irish writing, Irish short stories. You can see how the thinking was probably along the lines of, well, this is something to have forever. This is a collection of great work. So we don't expect you to read it once and throw it away. You're going to keep it. But it's still one which I noticed a lot of people were buying and kind of almost carrying around. Like you could see on social media, people loved it and they were like, oh, this great book. You know, like people would make the effort because it was a beautiful book. And another very interesting example was God, I'm going to forget the name, the Irish Revolution book, you know, the massive, it was a few years ago.
Okay.
But it was this huge, like, table-sized history of revolution in Ireland, produced by Cork University Press. They did an amazing job. It was full colour, you know, as I said, massive hardback, and it sold so well, amazingly well. And it's the kind of book you'd say, that's so big.
Yeah.
Where would you put it?
Yeah.
But everyone wanted to read about these rebellions, and maybe they had a connection in their locality or a family member, that the history was very important to people. So it sold like really well, not what you would necessarily think when you would see such a large book. So in that way, earlier, like I was talking about, you, when you start out with production, you are thinking about the market, you're thinking about how much you're spending on making the book, but you can also be led by instinct as a publisher, and that's where, you know, long years of experience come in.
I think this will be my last question before we go on to the Q&A. Like you mentioned when you're introducing yourself, you've worked in different departments. So what kind of, because it's like people working, it's not like this where you just work in one department for your whole career and that's it. Like people move between different departments, whether that's editorial, marketing, production. So what kind of skills or qualities have you been able to bring along your way in all these different roles?
Yeah, yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think the title of this talk, the original title was "When Worlds Meet." I
Mm-hmm.
think the idea of things crossing over. I think that's a very important attitude, almost, if you want to. Uh, well, like certainly for small publishers, but I think in life, in general, that you follow your interest. It doesn't have to be a matter of one or the other. It doesn't have to be, well, I'd love to be an editor, so I will only uh, pursue training on editing and read books about editing and follow editors online. You can have interests, and in fact, I would encourage everyone to have interests across the board, not only in editing, maybe look into design, look into even sales. Like, if you think you'd never be interested in sales, maybe someone can give a talk about sales and how important it is when you're pitching to talk about the quality of the writing. And that's an editorial facet of the book. Even things like we were talking about, the knowledge of shipping. First of all, you'd be like, God, I'm not, who wants to learn about the post? Who wants to learn about postage? But it comes up so much in publishing, especially small publishers. And even just knowing things like, oh, the weight of the book has such a big impact. It can change the cost of selling something. It can double it, and that's so interesting to me. Like then you can think about these starting points. If you're an editor and you know that massive books cost more, maybe it influences things like when you talk to the author and you're like, who do you want this to reach? If you think it's going to reach people around the world through web sales or whatever, maybe it'll be harder. Maybe we should talk to production, or maybe you should talk to sales. We'll always focus on the core of the work. You wouldn't chop up a book just to make it faster to sell online, cheaper to post. But I think all these things feed into each other. Having worked in different departments, for me, they all I wouldn't really think, I mean, they are different departments, but I don't really think of them as being these separate things that are to pursue individually. They all connect together in how it brings someone's work to the reader. Like that's the core of what you're doing. Whether you're working for like I've worked in educational publishing or academic or now in trade, you're taking someone's work, something that they've made that they might have spent years on, and you're trying to bring it to people who care and who really are interested in it. And that can be achieved through so many different ways, whether it's making it a production which is reasonable for that reader to access,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's in editing it thoughtfully, or whether it's in marketing it in a way that people will really want to read this or realize that they are the reader they're being spoken to. So I think having curiosity and having interest across the board is really helpful, whatever job you end up in. And I'd say having interest outside of publishing.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I think people can also, like you were talking about, what can be misconceptions. People who work in publishing, of course, love books. That's why we all end up here, just sort of falling into it. But I think it's also very important to have lots in your life. Just because you work in publishing, your whole life could be books, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But I also feel like having an open mind maybe you'll end up working in publishing, maybe you won't. But perhaps if you end up working in something else, you'll still love books, and maybe you'll have some other access to publishing. Maybe you'll go to launches and volunteer to help with things, or there are different ways that you can interact. And certainly by having interests all around, you might be into film, or you might be into exercise, or anything like that. But all of those things, if you do end up working in publishing, those facets still come into the process of whatever job you're doing. If you love film, maybe you'll have that visual imagination, and then you'll start seeing things differently in the book you're reading. Or if you love cooking or exercise or something, maybe that will also help alleviate your stress, because there can be, like we were talking about with Brexit, there are these times when you're like, just, oh, right, this launches tomorrow and there's no book. What do? You have to kind of be able to step outside that and go, look, we're all trying our best, go for a run, cook something, call a friend. These are all important. I think that's true for any industry, to be honest. Get outside the job. But so that's what I would say is something, regardless of what department you're in, is just keep your mind open, pursue your interest, and hopefully have lots of interests.
Well, thank you. I think now we'll move it over to the Q&A session. There is some questions that have been submitted. One submitted by someone anonymous. When you're deciding on the look of a book, do you look more at the story or at the trends, or what do you know will stand out on the shops or even Instagram? That's a good one.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's one which comes up all the time, I think. At Lilliput, Anthony Farrell has quite a strong sense of cover design, and as he says, you don't follow trends, you make trends. Yeah. So certainly for Lilliput, I can't say that Lilliput follows any trends of design, but at the same time, when you work with cover designers, they're very aware of trends, and they're very, very skilled and well versed in visual communication, telling a story. Great cover designers are also great readers, and would start with the manuscript itself, seeing what imagery comes out of it, what tone. I'm sure they're influenced by other covers. Like I was talking about, people who work in publishing go into bookshops all the time, see what's out there. Certainly when I would talk to cover designers, I'd talk from the beginning with a brief and maybe say, this is the kind of sense I'm getting myself. It reminds me of these books. But I would never want a designer to come back, and Anthony definitely would never want a designer to come back with like a replica of another publisher's cover, or to be kind of following that trend, because then I suppose you're not only doing a disservice maybe to the author, who I'm sure is saying something new. Like if you're publishing them, you probably believe in what they're talking about, that it's a new point of view, but it's also easy to get lost in the bookshop. So if you have covers which are all the, I don't know, person's face on a blue background or something, and the first time you see that, you go, wow, like that stands out so much. Mm-hmm. But the more you see it, the less impact it has. So it's always trying to find a new way of expressing what the genre might be, or what the story might be, but that's still original. There are certainly considerations when you talk about genre. Like I know certain areas of publishing, say crime or even fantasy, they might have some kind of tropes which their particular audiences might be familiar with and might gravitate towards. I haven't worked with those types of publishing, so I can't really talk about that. But I know for literature publishing, you could see that there are ways you can recognize a kind of literature text as opposed to, say, an academic text or even a crime novel. So of course you would try not to make your book look like a crime novel if it's a collection of poetry. Yeah. You don't want to mislead people that much. Although you could get a whole new audience.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good thing.
Try it, see how it goes.
Just like, yeah, maybe repackage with like opposite genre day or something. That could be quite fun actually as a publicity or marketing thing. If you're like, it's a fantasy book, but no, it's really realist fiction.
To reach more readers, maybe.
It would definitely reach very angry readers. But yeah, so there is a kind of, you know, I mean, the designer uses their design sense to fit in within the genre, but I think from there you need to be original as well.
Yeah. I think you kind of mentioned, the next question is there any projects you've worked on where the production process changed completely midway through, and what did you do?
That's also a very interesting question. All right, let me think about this for a second and see, is there any? Well, you know, in general, the initial stage when the manuscript comes in, and like I was talking about, that's when the decision's made about, is it going to be hardback or paperback? You know, if it's paperback, does it have flaps? Maybe, you know, during the editorial process, so you could go away and you could get your print quotes and you could set up what your price is, you could start telling people about it. But maybe midway through the editing process, the editor might come back and say, oh, I really think this is like this. They might say, oh, I could see this lasting on people's shelves for a long time, like we were talking about with library books or with The Art of the Glimpse. That's something people have forever. So then you might think, well, actually, if that's the case, maybe it should be hardback. You know, maybe we're doing a disservice by choosing paperback or something like that. So at that point, there is still flexibility until you say go to print, that you can make that decision. You can get more quotes, you can change things up, talk to your sales people as well. So there is still some flexibility. What I would say is, even when the changes seem radical, I think the core of it all has to be, are you servicing the text? Are you servicing the author and their work? If you're changing things without that in mind, then maybe you're damaging what the product is going to be, what the book is going to be. But if you're changing things to make it better, then I think even when it's a little bit hairy and you're like, oh, okay, I got to get onto that printer like straight away, you're going to do it with such better energy, because you'll be like, this would be so much nicer as the other thing. So I'd say that's it.
Yeah, and I worked in production for a year, and what sometimes we would have done was got dummies from the printers. So say if you wanted to see like this type of binding or this type of width of paper, you got some examples. So I know that's sometimes things that publishers might want to do before they decide on something, just to be sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. And printers are very really knowledgeable and helpful too. Printers, print companies that publishers go to, they would have qualifications in printing and design. Like they've very high knowledge of production, more so than people in a publishing office necessarily. Now, I'm sure there are people in publishing offices all over who are equally qualified, so not to do them disservice, but I know that printers we've worked with would have a lot of knowledge of like the paper stock and how ink can be printed well on it, and even in terms of like that with binding, that they might say, oh well, you know, this width of spine, we could do this other binding that would be more secure. Like they know an awful lot about the actual physical making of the book. So you can always talk to printers, and they'll send you free samples if you're willing to place an order with them. They'll send you samples.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, that is a great way. It's actually so much fun, even if you don't have any books in mind, just to get, you know, different textures of paper, different grammage or different binding, and just have a look. It's like what we're talking about, going to a bookshop and seeing these things. Like every book is a sample in a way.
Mm-hmm. I think then we'll just, on our last question, I thought it would be nice to end on if you've got any advice or tips, because I'm sure there's probably publishing hopefuls watching today. if you've got any particular advice.
Sure. Yeah. Well, like I was saying earlier, I think having curiosity about the world, like what is publishing, but these stories and information being transmitted all around the world, you would hope. So when you have interest in the world, I think those things can come through. And whether it's interest in different departments in publishing, learning whatever you can, following threads, reading articles, reading books on things, or even maybe even doing courses, although I know that's not within everyone's reach, but getting books from the library, like there are definitely ways to access information here and there about different areas. I'd also say on a more like specific level, if you are applying for a job, read the job description like it's an exam question. It's something which I've noticed a lot of people maybe overlook. The job description, if it says something like we're looking for an outgoing, detail-oriented, great communicator for this, then they really want to see those examples of where you've worked or when you've been outgoing, where you've been communicative, specific things. I think quite a lot of people, when they apply, and like, to be fair, who learns these, like who gives this information out really? But a lot of people can send a CV where they just talk about the chronology of their experience, and they might say, well, my last job was working here, previously I worked there, all the way back to my very first job. And that's good, but what the person assessing the application wants to see is that you say, well, my last job, I was good at communicating, I showed I was outgoing, and in the previous job, I also did these things. Job before wasn't really relevant for that, so I won't include it. So being quite like breaking down the job ad in that way, I think it just gives an application a whole new level of relevance. So that was something I just wanted to mention as a helpful, like hopefully a helpful tip. But as I said, I can understand like who knows these things, who finds these things out.
What advice I was given once: don't read the job title, but the job description, because job title is just a job title. You could be doing a mixture of things that necessarily not might apply to like editorial, like admin stuff, things like that. So
yeah, you're so right. Yeah, the title could be a guide, but then again, different places use the same title for totally different jobs. But the job description, you're right. If you pay attention to what that says, and then line up your application with what they specifically say, you're going to be in with like a lot more of a chance than just the standard chronological CV.
well, thank you again. Thanks, Ruth. Well, that brings the webinar to end. We've got no more questions. So thank you, Ruth, for taking your time to be part of tonight's event. And thank you to everyone who's joined. If you're not already an SYP member, an SYP membership gives you access to benefits and events across all committees. There is an event later this week where there'll be a live Q&A with all the SYP committee chairs, which may interest some of you, so you'll get to ask your questions then a bit more about the SYP and what we're going to do and hope to do. But that's it. Well, thank you again. Thanks again, Ruth, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks so much, Talitha. It was great. Thanks everyone for attending as well.
Thank you, Ruth.